Right. Hello, Facebook. This is Debby Enoe, Teacher Success Coach. I have been doing a number of roundtable discussion with female educators around the world. And today we'll be looking at assessments, how some of the educators are assessing their students while on lockdown, because we now have the new normal. So as a result of that, the educators have to actually think in that way as to how they're going to be looking at assessment quite differently. Because when you actually do the assessment, in the classroom, it's very different from now you're doing it online. I'd like to welcome my guest, Najiri. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Can you actually tell us in terms of, what age group you teach and how you actually assess your students now under this new normal?
So, well, I teach a wide range of students. I am a third grade core content teacher at a local IB school here on the beautiful island of Anguilla. I'm also the owner of Branches of Learning and founder of Big on Learning, which we have an after-school program that serves students early childhood to grade 6. In my role at the IB school, I work with students in upper primary 3rd grade. I'm also the instructional specialist at the school as well. So I work primarily with the early childhood and primary age students.
Okay. There is a delay. Okay, so how you actually, in terms of assessing, how do you assess your student now in relationship to how you have been assessing them while you were in the classroom, bearing in mind things are so very different?
Well, of course, with COVID-19 and the switch to automatic, I guess we would love to say, some said homeschool, crisis education, you name, you can give it your its own name. I believe that in essence, the initial change would have been crisis education. And in terms of assessment and assessing, I would have to say that I strayed away from any initial type of academic assessing and really focused on the social and emotional needs of not only my students, but also of our families and parents. We're very fortunate, unlike some countries around the world that have faced many life loss due to COVID-19, that we had very few cases, and we were actually, we have no active cases and are considered to be COVID-free at this time. So we're very fortunate, but our children are still, or have been exposed to the news. And so the impact of the world and what is happening around them was still very emotionally stressful for them, and understanding why aren't we together? Why can't we come to school? And so in the beginning, coming to grips with just understanding that was my core assessment tool. How are you feeling today? What part of helping you feel like normal again, whether it's through our morning class meetings on Google, was really my focus. A daily check-in with my students. How's it going? What are you working on? Are you working on something that you're interested in, instead of automatically jumping into or continuing the curriculum? Of course, that came after. For me, particularly at the IB school, it came a little bit more naturally as my families and students were already on Google Classroom. We primarily use that as our mode of communication and the way that we shared information. So there was a more natural ease, I feel, with some who may have not had any type of e-learning or e-communication with their families, to make the process go a little bit easier. And so as we return to scaffolding in the curriculum and learning, simple things. I think one of the go-tos, of course, is formative assessment. We know that, yes, indeed, we have to assess our students. So assessment of student learning is the process, of course, of gathering and evaluating information of what students know, understand, and to do in order to make best instructional decisions for them to, of course, make growth. Formative assessment, I feel, is definitely the go-to. in these times. And I think with the various platforms, even teachers that use Zoom, we're on Zoom and Facebook right now, whether it's through WhatsApp. I think that formative assessment makes it easy through daily questioning and quizzes. And there's so many different apps and tools like Kahoot that teachers and persons can use to, do a quick assessment and check-in of where your students are, allowing them to be able to send and upload videos. I think my students loved more than anything the projects and the video responses that they were able to get based on their learning. And it showed me that, yes, indeed, they understood, they're understanding. And I think, one of the most challenging units, teaching poetry online to third graders. And let me tell you, I think it was one of our most successful units, between them reading and interpreting poetry and writing their own, giving them their voice. I think by giving them more voice in the lessons, made it much easier. Made it much more fun for them, which is something naturally we should do as teachers anyway. But definitely, I think formative assessment could and has provided the answer for me in order to know where my students are as learners.
Right. So would you say, in terms of how you're assessing now, is so much better than when you were actually, in the classroom? Because, the fact that you say when you actually did poetry with the children, it actually allowed them to be creative and express themselves. Do you think far more than they would have done if they were in the classroom?
I don't know if it would be much more. I have a very expressive class to begin with, but I think that doing it online and having the platform provided even more of an opportunity. And it gave more of a performance aspect to it as well. Because having them, whether we did it live or they uploaded an assignment, the preparation for them to prepare and do a video, the level of articulation, looking at all of their elements of presentation, even when it comes to going through the writing process you've written, and now the final pieces for you to share, how they went about presenting that. I think that in essence, there were times that I felt that, this form of communication worked better for quite a few of my students, excelled online versus in class. In class, I found that there are more distractions for our students. I think the asynchronous model worked best for a lot of my students, where they can manage their time, and I, as the teacher, was not necessarily managing the structure of, now it's time for math, now we're doing this. When they were able to manage and navigate what they wanted to do, they were self-assessing themselves. You know what, I think I can do this better now. And then they had the opportunities when we came online to say, you know what, I have a question on this particular assignment. So they were gauging and more self-directing their learning, and they really enjoyed that. When we switched to a more synchronous model where we were doing more frequent lives, I honestly found the engagement to reduce because you're trying to keep everyone on pace. And we found for our particular class, and not every class is the same, that the asynchronous model worked better for us.
Okay.
Because students, not only was I assessing, students and their needs and the family's needs and what worked best for them, but the students were able to assess themselves as learners as well.
Right. So do you think that is a good thing, because you actually give the students more ownership, isn't it?
Yes, definitely. I think this was also a lesson and a paradigm shift for some parents and some families to recognize and see that, my child, even at third grade, they can do this. Now my students I know how to upload assignments. They know how to navigate a lot more than we think. And if we provide them these opportunities, not just in a time of crisis, to do these things, that they would grow exponentially even more. And so for me, even we returned 2 weeks ago. We left school, I think March 13th, and we returned to school just 2 weeks ago, and keeping now a higher level of making our class more of a blended learning classroom environment. Yes, we are physically face-to-face, but there are going to be elements that we're still going to keep online because inevitably, unfortunately, COVID is not going to go away. Something else may come, and we have to be flexible, and we have to be ready to continue to learn. And one of the IB principles is being a lifelong learner and teaching our children how to navigate through and problem solve through different challenges. And this was one that we faced this year. And luckily we went through it together. We experienced the pain together. We talked about how it felt and what we liked and what we didn't like. And I think they've definitely grown as learners, and they'll definitely remember the experience.
Right. And another thing is, yes, I understand that, you actually communicate with the student in terms of your assessment was asking them how they were feeling. Their well-being was far more important. That I totally agree with. But what are you taking relationship to, where some people are saying, oh, well, the student need to be assessed because the assessment is a progression. What is your take on that?
So now that we've returned to school, so the time period while we were online, I did not give any physical grades. I only gave feedback.
Okay.
No physical, I didn't give any grades. We just gave feedback during that time. Since returning to school, based on the units that were covered, and even I've seen the daily practice that students submitted assignments and whether gave feedback, what I've done is what I created were some little checkpoints. So we finished our unit on geometry. So I created a quick checkpoint assessment based on those skills that were covered during that time period, just to assess and see exactly where they were in terms of alignment to the curriculum, where they need to be, so that there is some concrete data. Also, as an IB school, the students have learning portfolios. So the work that they uploaded, the hard copies that they had, I had them bring them into school so they can choose and reflect even more on the work that they did, what they understood, what they didn't understand. And we talk about within each unit that we cover, what I'm really good at, what I need to work at, and that process of reflection so that they can grow in those particular areas, so they can add that to their learning portfolios.
Okay, thank you. Do you think that now that in terms of assessment, there is no formative assessment, there's no exams, etc. Do you think this is a better way of assessing a student's ability, in terms of, testing them as you go along, instead of at the end of the whole course, they have an exam? Because
I believe that great educators and persons know that active progress monitoring with students, whether it's formative assessment, if you have a summative assessment at the end of the year, that's fine, but excessive standardized testing that doesn't look at the whole child, the idea of having the portfolio and looking at the growth from where a student began the year to the, to the end of year. I will not ever judge a student just based on one standardized test. That's just my educational philosophy. I need to see the big picture. Myself growing up, I was not a good test taker. Not until I became a teacher that I understand and start to break down this process of test taking. So now I know that there are specific skills and strategies that students need in order to test well. But does that in essence show that they are learning? And what type of learning and the depth of learning. And so those are the things that I think about. So in terms of, I'm very glad, and I hope that persons recognize in this time of crisis that our children will survive. They will be great next year, even if they have not had standardized testing. We have more than capable professionals, educators, teachers out there that are amazing and doing a great job. And sometimes that end of year assessment, I know particularly in the US, I've taught there, that's used as a marking tool for the teacher. Is she a great teacher? Did her children pass the test? And at the end of the day, that's not necessarily, it is not necessarily needed. Our students are still going to be successful, and we're going to get through this. So looking at varying forms of assessment, looking at and determining what years in a child's life do you want to do formal assessment, standardized testings, but not let that be the only measure. of that child's success. So looking at the whole child.
Right. It's interesting because that is something, I actually subscribe to as well. Because in England, we just have in terms of the GCSEs and the A-levels. But this year we have the situation where the students cannot sit the exams in terms of the GCSE and the A-levels. So it means that their grades would be based on the assessment or the mock which they've done. So what actually come to my mind is, okay, if it is okay this year, why shouldn't we not just do, throughout assessment instead of doing it at the end of the year where a student have to have a test? Because as we know, not everybody perform well in a test. And what the test is doing is just judging the student's ability to cram the information and then regurgitate it to pass the test. You see, that's one of my biggest issue in relationship to tests at the end of the year. And now, because assessment have never been done consistently for the A-level or the GCSEs, it means that teachers are basing it upon the mock which the students have had, because we have not done any real assessment throughout the year with our students.
So it helps us then to be reflective as educators and even look at testing now in those particular areas to say, hey, how can we do more active progress monitoring along the way? How can we assess our students and know that in fact, yes, they have met these objectives and standards prior to saying having the summative. As you said, teachers are going to have to make decisions based off of the work that has already been completed. And so looking at active progress monitoring aligned with standards and curriculum is going to be key in terms of how we do that.
I'm really in favor of active monitoring because it actually gives you a better assessment of the holistic child.
Yes.
Because when they're actually left to do an exam at the end of the year, it just determines a child's ability to pass tests. Not every child is capable of passing a test. That could be extremely bright, but under testing condition and exam condition, they can no longer do that. So it's interesting that, which way we are going to go right now in relationship to assessment and in relationship to the exams, because the students are not doing exam this year. So therefore, we still have to give them a grade. Yes. So isn't it a situation where the teachers know the students anyway? So why should that not be a model to take forward? Exactly. Instead of relying upon an end of year exam. So it's going to be really interesting to see, because right now, the government is relying on the teachers' ability to assess the academic level of that child.
And the government should, trust teachers and professionals to do that and not only have a test at the end of the year, do that. And again, taking a holistic look at the child and how they're able to perform, not just in a testing situation, but in practical situations as well.
Yeah, and I personally think that's where the education system have actually failed children, because it relies solely on an exam at the end of it. And it's, what I find interesting in this COVID-19, things happen for a reason. And I think the reason, especially within education, because every industry have moved forward, except the education sector. Because when you look at the setup in the education sector, it is still the same way our grandparents used to be taught, in the same setup. So that is quite, alarming. Now where we are now forced to use online setup, and in terms of the assessment, we now have to assess students not from the end of year exam, because there isn't any, is relying upon our judgment as educators who have taught these children, who know their ability. And the sad thing about it is we are not given enough autonomy to make judgment of children's ability. That's the sad thing which I find in education, because we know our students, we teach them, so we know their ability. So therefore, in terms of assessment, I personally feel that should be left to the educators to identify how the students should be assessed.
Definitely.
And this end of year issue is like I had a number of my students saying to me, Miss, I really cannot do exams. And the fact is, a lot of this, especially the A levels and the GCSEs, there are not continuous tests. It is only continuous if a teacher wants to actually, give student tests, systematically, but it's not something that is compulsory that you have to do. The only thing that you have to do is the mock exams, but apart from that, there is nothing that say, okay, you have to give them an assessment, let's say every 4 weeks to check the progress. It's not like that. It's relied upon at the end of the year. And it's so, I find it so interesting in the fact that this year, COVID-19 have actually forced us to look at alternative way of assessing the student instead of assessing them through the exam with the GCSE and the A level at the end of the year.
Yeah, so again, I think it's a good reflective point and piece for educators, for government officials, those looking at assessment and what to do about assessment, and look at what systems can be put in place ongoing. Like you said, good teachers naturally, and I'm sure you've naturally have been progress monitoring. Again, we know our students, we know the quality of our students' work, and that in itself is the formative assessment, the questioning. Through questioning, we know what our students know. And now looking at and helping teachers to be able to document that, to be able to curate the data, to say that, yes, indeed, I know, and the child knows also, not that you can just prove it, but the child can prove through their curation and data and notes and activities and presentations and a combination of activities and learning exercises that, yes, indeed, they have mastered these objectives. They have mastered these standards.
Yeah, well, COVID have actually forced us this year to find an alternative. So definitely. It would be really good to see the way forward in this. Would we actually go back to how we were in terms of the method of assessment, or are we going to do a combination of? It's going to be interesting to see how education progress post, COVID-19. Because one of the things I also want to do as well, I'm now interviewing teachers who are actually working during, COVID-19. I know, after September, I'll be looking at how things have changed or what have changed. Has anything changed? Are there a combination of, or have we resort back to some of the old patterns?
Yes, I know we keep speaking of the new norm, and I think that, it's one of those things that crisis sometimes forces our hand to change. And I believe that there will be a level of a blended approach, but there is no going back. For myself as an educator, it was the path in which I was headed anyway, in terms of through private services, I already do online services and programming, but making sure and preparing that our traditional schools are prepared for blended learning. In the event of another pandemic where children are sent home, and helping teachers be more prepared for that transition. We've done it, many have done it around the world in crisis. And now the next time it happens, I think we're going to be even more creative, because let me tell you, the support of educators across the world, if there was a resource or tool that you needed to figure out to meet the needs of our children, and which tells you that our children that we serve are the core of what we do, you could find it. This really, this season and this time has really just shown the passion of educators, the passion of education providers, and providing the resources to make it happen, to show that learning doesn't have to physically take place in the traditional school building. Just because students are out of the building doesn't mean that learning is not going to take place, and it can take place in amazing ways. And I think that is what a lot of persons have learned. If you weren't in tune with what was happening in terms of education, I'm sure, now parents are really, it helped parents make a huge paradigm shift in terms of, really understanding, what is their child working on? If you weren't involved and or engaged, better yet, you became engaged because you're like, what in the world are they supposed to be learning? What am I supposed to be doing? And so I think it has also bridged that partnership with parents. I know I feel that in many essence, there's a new level of respect for teachers, and partnership. And so I'm excited for that change as well.
Yeah, but my question is, okay, now we've seen the level of respect for educators because the parents in crisis. When they're no longer in crisis, would we actually be respected, or would they still say that, they are going to come and get us because we've actually spoken to the child, how they feel that we shouldn't, or we've told them that, the child is this way, which they think that the child is that way. It's interesting because
it's definitely a debate. I feel right now, especially with my parents going back, my parents are like, oh, okay, I can breathe. They're back with their teacher. They're in safe hands, right? But what I say to them, it's still a partnership. We still have to communicate at the same level that we were. Okay, maybe I had a very high level of communication with my parents. And I think it's very important, regardless of crisis or not, again, because I felt assessing what they could handle, what the students could handle, what I could handle as a mom. I have a 4-year-old and a 9-year-old at home. So I too, as a parent, as a teacher, managing all of those different things, we really had to discuss how all of that was going to work together. But we have to remember that, again, not only in crisis, because I still have a 4 and 9-year-old when we're back to regular schedule, you still have your normal life. It's about, I think, continuing the level of communication, continuing and sharing the understanding of partnership. Again, also for the students, I think through this, especially even at 3rd grade and younger grades, I'm sure also, in older grades, definitely, helping the students to become more self-directed in their learning and taking ownership, helping them to work on their executive functioning skills in terms of organizing and managing their time, in terms of, what do I really like as a learner? Do I prefer to go at my own pace, or do I want it to be synchronized, with my teacher? All of those different things. So I hope that the conversations continue, but I think it's going to be up to us as teachers to continue that level of partnership. Because we really with COVID, I felt you had to be there with your parents. It had to be in order for it to be successful for the child.
Did you do you do peer assessment in terms of the student actually supporting each other in terms of assessment?
In terms of giving student peer feedback, yes.
Okay.
Students do have an opportunity to give feedback, and I think it's just a natural part of the IB process and learning, and when they're sharing and being a reflective learner and sharing with each other and giving feedback, and what do you think could have made this better? So I think it's a natural part of what we do, but yes, peer feedback is definitely important as well.
Okay. So are you now doing this within your online teaching, or that was during the classroom setting?
That's a combination of both, because students are able to, after someone shares, I kind of model it after my teaching cycle. I always say you always start with a praise point and then a teaching point. So I teach my students the same thing. You have a praise point for your peer in terms of what they did really well, and then you have a teaching point, which would be a critique on what they could have done better. So I use the same model that I would use with my students when I'm conferring with them about their reading or writing during a conference, a praise point and a teaching point, keeping it focused, but celebrating and then showing them a way that they can grow.
Okay. And that you also do online with them?
Yes.
Okay. So are they able to do peer online assessment though?
So in terms of giving each other written feedback, they may give verbal feedback. I didn't do any forms online. In class, though, we have these slips that we use, particularly for writing conferences, where they fill out and they give their peer specific feedback.
Okay. But online, that is a little bit more challenging to do.
It's a little bit more challenging. But one way that they did it, a lot with the experiments and things that could have been loaded. So their videos, they were able to share and give comments. Comments in the comment section on Google Classroom, so that's fine. For things that they uploaded, per se, assignments that were sent directly to me, then they couldn't give feedback, but there were certain assignments that we shared where everyone could see and then everyone could give feedback.
Okay.
Yes.
So you did it as a whole class, a whole class
assessment. As a whole class. So the videos or presentations would be shared, and then classmates would share comments and give feedback on what students did. Okay. Thank you for that. And remember, they're third grade.
Oh, yes. Okay, have you got any tips for, educators who are saying, okay, I have to assess, I'm not too sure how I can assess my students online now, because I can no longer assess them in the same method that I once used to when I was in the classroom. So what tips would you be able to give to an educator who now have to assess he or she student?
Well, once you're continuing to assess and go by your standards, of course, using those as a guideline, having many rubrics. I find rubrics make it really easy to assess students. And there are lots of tools and resources out there. So creating rubrics for your assignments. There are some built-in assessment tools on, for example, Google Classroom, where you can do a quick quiz, where you can put in a multiple choice quiz and they actually do it right there online, whether it's live or you can have them go back and do it. I know my third grade class absolutely loved Kahoot. Those different games are very interactive, where they can give their feedback and answer questions. We've been doing a lot of that, especially with my partner teacher, Ms. Walker, who's doing social studies and science, and they put in the information and they plug in and they see the results. And then it's a good opportunity also for them to look at, wow, why did this percentage of the class think it was this answer, and analyze, why this is the correct answer, why, and why students were thinking possibly another way. Exit slips, I think those are typically, I heard, speaking to a few teachers, and they say, oh, they use exit slips primarily with older students, but I like exit slips with younger students as well. And it's just having an exit question for the end of a lesson to help transition. And what I have students do is I'll ask a question based on what we've just learned, or they'll solve a problem based on what we've just learned in their journals as their exit slip. And we'll go around and do a quick check to see if, yes, they're on track. And also giving students opportunity and time to just be reflective about their learning, sharing their feelings about the learning process. And sometimes I would have a little box, and the student would place in, I'm not getting it, just to kind of know an emotional and mental check-in on where a student is at, so that I can redirect instruction in order to support them as well. Okay. So it's about that constant communication, questioning, opportunity for student reflection, and feedback. Timely feedback to students is absolutely critical in the assessment process. That they know that, yes, I'm on track, or no, I'm not on track, and what I need to do to get on track. So again, initially I just started off with, during COVID, online, no particular grades, just giving feedback, and that was very helpful for students, and it helped them to gain confidence too.
Yeah, it actually made them feel more relaxed that they're not being assessed.
Yes, the pressure, I think there was definitely a sense of less pressure online, whereas versus in class, they may feel the pressure, a little bit more. I think they felt definitely a little bit more relaxed in that aspect.
Okay. Have you got anything else? Anything else?
I just wanted, we've kind of covered quite a bit. It's just, again, I just want to reinforce that in terms of assessment, informative assessment, it needs to be, of course, valid, timely, and specific. to the learning needs of the child so that they would be able to continue to learn and grow, and that teachers and parents, of course, need to feel empowered. Again, continuing the level of communication during crisis, continuing that on to creating better relationships, to conduct formative assessments themselves, in essence, so that they can better understand their children and their learning. So I think that would help help in terms of the future as well.
Yeah, because when parents is actually active in the children's learning, it does make a lot of difference.
It does. It makes a huge difference, because they're like, oh, they realize, oh, they're not able to do this. Maybe I can do this. Or better yet, teacher, I'm recognizing that he's really having a hard, or he or she is having a hard time with this. And then it helps me to be able to pool resources, to be able to share, to be able to support parents. So I think, again, in terms of assessment, formative assessment can definitely help all students to continue along their learning trajectory and provide them and their parents with the necessary information to continue the learning process, whether we're physically in school or whether we're online.
Yeah, that's very true. Okay, thank you very, very much for that. Thank you. Thanks, Facebook.
Thank you.
Thanks, and I'll see you later. Thanks.
Take care. Thank you. Bye-bye.